You signed the quitclaim deed 2 years ago, Claire, my brother said, his voice smooth and unhurried, like he was explaining something to a child who couldn't quite grasp basic arithmetic. The house is gone. Vanessa needed the capital, and you were always going to get your half eventually. Consider it an early disbursement of what was coming to you anyway. I was standing in the kitchen of his new build in Dublin, Ohio, holding a tax notice that had arrived at my apartment that morning, a notice informing me that my share of the proceeds from the sale of our parents' home in Clintonville had been reported to the IRS. $182,000, split down the middle, the document suggested. $91,000 that had allegedly passed through an account in my name, on a date I had absolutely no memory of, for a transaction I had never agreed to. My parents had been gone for 2 years. A January highway accident on I-71, black ice, a semi that couldn't stop in time. They had left behind a paid-off craftsman bungalow on Indianola Avenue and a will that divided everything equally between my brother Derek and me. It was the house where my mother had grown tomatoes in clay pots on the back porch, and my father had kept every issue of National Geographic in chronological order in the basement. It was supposed to be ours together, something we would decide about when the grief had softened enough to make decisions. I had never signed anything. I had never been told the house was sold. I looked at my brother across the kitchen island and said, very quietly, "Where is my money?" He refilled his coffee mug without looking up. "I told you, Claire, you signed the deed. The money went into the business. Vanessa's boutique is doing incredibly well. You saw the spread in Columbus Monthly. Once she hits her revenue targets, we'll figure out a payment plan. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. You're the responsible one, remember?" His wife, Vanessa, came in from the hallway at that moment, barefoot, carrying a mood board for what appeared to be a new store layout. She glanced between us, smiled the particular smile she reserved for situations where she had already won, and said, "We really do appreciate your investment in the brand, Claire. We're going to do something meaningful with it." I left without finishing my coffee. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my jaw locked so tightly, my teeth ached. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to call a lawyer that same afternoon, to call Derek back and tell him exactly what I intended to do, to post the tax notice online and let people see what had been done to my parents' home, to my name, to the last physical piece of my family that had existed in the world. I didn't do any of those things. I had been a paralegal for 6 years at a small firm in Worthington. I had watched enough cases unravel because someone moved too fast, showed their hand before they had all the cards, let emotion override strategy. I had watched opposing counsel build entire defenses on the impulsiveness of the plaintiff. I knew, in the cold and functional part of my brain that still worked, even when the rest of me wanted to burn everything down, that I needed to understand exactly what had been done before I made a single move. I also needed someone I could trust. Maya had been my closest friend since we were assigned to adjacent desks at the firm 7 years earlier, back when she was still finishing her law degree at night. She was a real estate attorney now, meticulous and unsentimental in the way that good lawyers learn to be. I called her that evening and read her the tax notice over the phone. There was a long silence on her end. Then she said, "Don't say anything to him. Don't call him. Don't text him. Don't send an email. Don't tell anyone else in the family yet. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning before 9? I was there at 8:15. Over the next 3 days, Maya pulled every document associated with the sale of my parents' house. The quitclaim deed that transferred my half of the property to Derek had been filed at the Franklin County Recorder's office 11 months after our parents died. It bore my signature, notarized and dated. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Patricia Gould, a mobile notary based in Westerville. Maya looked at the date on the document and then at me. "Where were you on March 14th of last year?" I stared at the date for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my health app, scrolled back, and felt something cold settle in my chest. I was in the hospital. Appendectomy, emergency surgery the night before, recovery observation through the afternoon. I have discharge papers, the surgical notes, everything. Maya set her pen down very carefully on the desk. "He notarized a document with your signature on a day when you were in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. We didn't say anything else for a moment. We didn't need to." She contacted Patricia Gould the following week, presenting herself simply as an attorney conducting a title review. The woman was in her 60s, semi-retired, and she had notarized hundreds of documents over the years. When Maya laid the deed in front of her and asked her to describe the circumstances of the notarization, Patricia's expression shifted. She had met with a man, she said. He had presented her with 2 IDs his own, and one for his sister. Along with what he said was a medical authorization explaining why his sister couldn't appear in person. He had been very professional, very organized. She had been told the sister had mobility issues following a procedure and had pre-signed the document. Maya asked if Patricia had independently verified the sister's identity. Patricia looked at the table. "No," she said softly. "He was so prepared. He had everything," I assumed. Maya thanked her and told her to expect a follow-up call from a county investigator. Patricia Gould, to her credit, did not hesitate. She said she would cooperate with whatever was needed. She had been deceived, and she knew it. I want to be precise about what my brother had actually done with the money. Vanessa's boutique, Velvet and Grace, had opened 8 months ago in the Short North neighborhood, occupying a corner space that rented for nearly $6,000 a month. It carried high-end women's clothing and accessories, the kind of place that sold linen blazers for $400 and called it accessible luxury. The startup costs build-out, inventory, branding. The grand opening party that had been covered by 2 local lifestyle blogs had been funded almost entirely by the proceeds from our parents' house. On paper, Derek and Vanessa had formed an LLC, Velvet and Grace Creative Holdings. The registered agent was Derek. The listed financial officer, the name on the business banking documentation, the person the small business loan application had cited as a co-guarantor with clean credit and professional financial history was me, my name, my social security number, my professional record as a paralegal at a reputable firm. I was the invisible architecture of a business I had never agreed to support. Maya flagged this immediately. "This isn't just deed fraud," she told me. "They used your identity to establish financial credibility for the LLC. Depending on what else is in those filings, you could be looking at identity theft, forgery, and potentially fraud on the loan application." She paused. "Claire, when this unravels, and it is going to unravel, you need to make absolutely certain that you are the one who brings it to the surface. Not him, not a creditor, not a tax audit, you." I understood what she meant. I spent the next 3 weeks not sleeping very much and not saying a word to Derek. We texted twice, both times initiated by him, both times about family logistics that had nothing to do with any of this. I responded normally, briefly. I gave him nothing. During those 3 weeks, Maya compiled a packet and brought it to a contact she had at the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. The contact referred it to a state investigator who handled real estate fraud. His name was Agent Holloway. And when I sat across from him in a conference room and laid out everything, the tax notice, the hospital records, Patricia Gould's statement, the LLC documents with my identity on them, he looked at the stack of paper for a long moment and said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" "About a month," I told him. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "That's the right call." Then the ground shifted. I arrived at work on a Tuesday morning to find a message asking me to come to the managing partner's office before I went to my desk. My direct supervisor was already in the room when I got there, and neither of them looked comfortable. My managing partner slid a printed email chain across the conference table. It was a series of messages, supposedly sent from my work account, addressed to a client, a real estate developer we had been representing in a significant commercial dispute. The messages contained what appeared to be confidential case strategy, settlement figures, privileged attorney-client communications. They were addressed to the opposing party's counsel. I read through the chain twice. The grammar was mine, or close to it. The formatting looked right, but I had never written a single word of it. I said, very clearly, "These are fabricated. I did not send these." My managing partner looked pained. "Your brother contacted us yesterday afternoon, Claire. He expressed serious concerns about your mental state. He said you've been under significant emotional distress since your parents passed, that you've been making erratic decisions, and that he was reaching out of genuine concern. Then this morning, this email chain came to our attention through an anonymous tip to the firm's ethics line." I sat with that for a moment. The precision of it, the timing, the fact that Derek had called first, preloading the narrative, so that when the email surfaced, the firm was already primed to see instability rather than sabotage. I said, I need you to pull the server logs for my account, check the IP addresses and the send timestamps. I was not in this building when several of those messages were sent. I can prove it. My managing partner said they would look into it, but in the meantime, given the sensitivity of the client relationship, they needed to place me on administrative leave pending the investigation. He said it gently. He said he hoped it was a misunderstanding. He said these things in the tone of a person who had already made up his mind. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon and drove home past the Clintonville neighborhood where my parents' house used to be, where some other family now lived, in the rooms where my mother had kept her tomato pots and my father his magazines, and I thought about the specific coldness required to plan something like this. To pre-sign forged documents before the grief had even settled, to wait and let me go about my life for 2 years, thinking I still had an inheritance waiting, while using my name to borrow credibility for a business I knew nothing about. To call my employer the day before the fabricated emails surfaced, so the story was already in place. This had not been improvised. This had been architected. My bank accounts were fine. Maya had advised me weeks earlier to move my savings to a new institution and put a fraud alert on my credit, which I had done quietly without telling Derek. He hadn't gotten to that part yet, or perhaps he'd decided it wasn't necessary. He was confident. I had always been the one who absorbed things and moved on. He probably expected that pattern to hold. The following morning, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a civil complaint. Derek and Vanessa were suing me for defamation, claiming I had made false and damaging statements about their business to third parties, and for tortious interference with their business relationships, claiming my alleged conduct had caused measurable harm to Velvet and Grace. At the back of the complaint was an exhibit, a statement I had supposedly given to a business journalist, full of quotes I had never said, painting their boutique as a fraudulent enterprise. I had spoken to no journalist. I had spoken to virtually no one except Maya and Agent Holloway. I called Maya and read her the complaint. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "He's trying to make you the aggressor. If you respond publicly, it looks like the defamation was real. If you say nothing, the civil suit moves forward and creates a public record that frames you as the problem." She paused. "Claire, how close is Holloway to being ready?" I called Agent Holloway that afternoon. He said they were working with the county prosecutor and had been coordinating with the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions regarding the loan documentation. He said, "I need you to give me 2 more weeks. I know it's hard, but I need 2 more weeks." I said I could do that. I want to tell you that those 2 weeks were manageable. They were not. I was unemployed. I was named in a civil lawsuit. And Vanessa had posted a statement on the Velvet and Grace Instagram page, which had 40,000 followers, about the emotional difficulty of having a family member spread lies about a small business built with love, sacrifice. She did not name me directly. She didn't need to. Mutual acquaintances who knew our family connected the dots immediately. I received 3 text messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, all variations of the same sentiment. They were sorry I was going through something. They hoped I would get help. They were thinking of me. My name was being quietly buried under a story about my own instability, and I wasn't allowed to correct it yet. I found the thing that kept me steady in a box I'd never fully unpacked after my parents died. It was a small notebook my mother had kept. Not a diary exactly, more of a record: appointments, phone numbers, things she didn't want to forget. In the back she had written, in her deliberate school teacher handwriting, the address of a safe deposit box at a credit union in Bexley, with a note that said, "Ask both of them together." She had meant Derek and me. I had never gone. I assumed Derek had handled it as executor, the same way he had handled everything else. I went alone the following morning with my identification and the death certificate I had kept in my own files. The credit union manager explained that the box had never been accessed since my parents' deaths. I was listed as a co-owner on the account, which gave me legal access. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to both of us, and a second, smaller envelope addressed only to me. The one addressed to me contained a letter from my mother, written about 2 years before she died, in which she said she had some concerns about Derek's financial judgment and wanted me to know that she had spoken to their estate attorney separately about adding an independent executor oversight clause to the will, She had not done it yet at the time of writing. She had intended to in the spring. She had died in January. There was also a thumb drive. It held scanned copies of the original will, correspondence between my mother and the estate attorney discussing her concerns, and a recorded phone call my mother had apparently called Derek to confront him about a loan he had taken from their personal account without asking 2 years before they died. In the recording, Derek spoke to my mother in a tone I had never heard directed at her before. Dismissive, almost contemptuous. "She's always going to have her little career, Mom. She doesn't need the same cushion I do. She's fine." He had been calculating the margins of my needs against his wants for a very long time. I gave the thumb drive to Agent Holloway the next morning. He called me back 4 hours later. His voice was measured, but there was something underneath it. "This is significant," he said. "The recorded call demonstrates premeditated intent well before the forgery occurred. I'm moving up our timeline. Can you tell me if there are any upcoming public events associated with Velvet and Grace?" There were. The boutique's 1-year anniversary party was scheduled for the following Saturday evening. Vanessa had been promoting it heavily across social media, a ticketed event, local press invited, a feature interview scheduled with a lifestyle magazine. It was meant to be the official coronation of a successful first year. Champagne, live music, a curated guest list that included several prominent names in Columbus business and arts circles. I bought a ticket under my middle name. I want to be honest about what I wore that night. I wore the blazer I had bought for my firm's holiday party, the one I hadn't worn since being placed on leave, because I wanted to walk in feeling like myself and not like someone who had spent the past month having her life methodically dismantled. I did my makeup carefully. I drove across town to the short north with the windows down and a steadiness in my chest that surprised me, because I had expected to be afraid. I wasn't afraid. I was simply ready. The boutique was beautiful. I'll give Vanessa that. Warm lighting, carefully arranged racks, the kind of atmosphere that makes you feel like you've walked into someone's very expensive idea of a good life. There were perhaps 80 people in the space. Derek was at the back near the champagne table, working the room in the easy way he'd always had with people. That particular gift of making whoever he was talking to feel like the most interesting person present. Vanessa was near the front, laughing with the lifestyle magazine editor, gesturing at the store around her with visible pride. She saw me first. Her expression didn't collapse exactly. It tightened. She excused herself from the editor and moved toward me, and I held my champagne glass and smiled. "Claire," she said quietly, "I don't think this is appropriate. Tonight isn't the place." I told her I was just there to support small business. Derek appeared at her shoulder 30 seconds later. His smile stayed in place, but his eyes went flat. "Time to go, Claire." "I mean it. Don't make a scene." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not making anything," I said. "I'm a ticketed guest." He leaned in closer. "You have no idea what I'll do if you don't walk out that door right now. I have a lawyer on call. 1 phone call and you're looking at a restraining order filed before morning." I said, "You should make that call, Derek. The more phone records they pull, the better." He stared at me for a moment with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between calculation and the first thin edge of uncertainty. Then he straightened, nodded once, and walked away toward the back of the store, and I watched him take his phone out of his pocket. I waited. Agent Holloway had told me there would be no drama from his end. He was not interested in drama. He was interested in a clean arrest, with no chaos that could compromise the case. What happened next was therefore quiet, in the way that very consequential things sometimes are. 2 plainclothes investigators entered through the front door at 8:47. A third came through the back. I watched Derek register their presence from across the room, watched the moment his face understood what was happening before his body caught up. He tried to move toward the kitchen corridor at the back of the space. One of the investigators was already there. Vanessa had a different kind of moment. She was standing near the feature wall, the one with the boutique's logo rendered in brass lettering, and she looked from Derek to the investigators and then at me, and I saw on her face the full and sudden comprehension of what her beautiful store actually was, what it had been built from, whose name had been used to make it real. One of the investigators introduced himself to Derek in a voice too low for most of the room to hear, But the room had gone silent in the way rooms do when something irreversible is happening and everyone can feel it. I heard the words fraud and forgery and warrant, and I watched my brother's shoulders drop in a way I had never seen in my entire life. Vanessa said, "This is a mistake," her voice rising just enough to carry. "This is a terrible mistake." She turned to the lifestyle magazine editor who was still standing nearby, her expression trying to reconstruct itself into something that made sense. She said, "This is harassment. This is what she's been doing to us." Nobody said anything in response. The room watched. I set my champagne glass on a display table and walked toward Vanessa slowly. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't triumphant either. Not in the way I had imagined I might be during the weeks of ramen and sleeplessness, and trying to keep my face composed while people I'd known my whole life sent me gentle texts about getting help. I was something quieter than either of those things. I said, "The house on Indianola sold for $364,000. My half was $182,000. That's what's in these walls, Vanessa. That's what's in every item on these racks. My parents' house." She opened her mouth and closed it again. I said, "I hope the linen blazers were worth it." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the front door and stood on the sidewalk in the October air and called Maya, who answered on the first ring and said, "Well, it's done," I told her. The months that followed were not simple, but they were clarifying. Derek was charged with deed fraud, forgery, identity theft, and financial fraud in connection with the LLC and small business loan application, 5 counts in total. The county prosecutor moved forward without asking me to negotiate anything down. Vanessa was charged separately on 2 counts related to the loan application, on the basis that she had signed documents she knew contained fraudulent co-guarantor information. The civil suit Derek had filed against me for defamation was dismissed with prejudice once the criminal charges became public record. The plaintiff loses some of his standing, Maya explained with a level of understatement I found impressive, when he is simultaneously indicted for forging the defendant's name on a property deed. The firm where I had worked reopened my case after the server logs confirmed, exactly as I had predicted, that the emails had been sent from an IP address that was not mine and not in the building during the relevant timestamps. The fabrication was traced to a device registered in Vanessa's name. My managing partner called me personally to offer reinstatement and to express that the firm deeply regretted the circumstances. He used the words "deeply regretted" twice in the same sentence, which I noted. I did not return to the firm. Maya had been urging me for years to go to law school. I had always found a reason to weight cost, timing, the sense that my life was almost in the shape I wanted, and I could afford to be patient. Patience had not served me especially well in recent history. I applied to 3 programs in the fall and was accepted to 2. Before I started, I filed the wrongful termination suit. Maya handled it. The firm's own server records, combined with the criminal charges against Vanessa that established the fabricated emails as deliberate third-party fraud rather than anything the firm could have anticipated, made the case straightforward. We settled in 4 months for an amount I agreed not to disclose, but which was enough to cover my first year of law school and leave a reasonable margin beyond it. The proceedings against Derek and Vanessa took most of the following year. Patricia Gould, the notary, testified about the circumstances of the fraudulent notarization. The estate attorney who had corresponded with my mother testified about the concerns she had expressed regarding Derek's financial reliability. The thumb drive with the phone recording was entered into evidence. Agent Holloway testified about the LLC filings and the paper trail connecting my stolen identity to the business loan. Derek pleaded guilty on 4 of the 5 counts 2 weeks before the trial date, a decision his attorney clearly advised when it became apparent that the evidence was not going to become less overwhelming between then and the courtroom. He was sentenced to 4 years. Vanessa went to trial, was convicted on both counts, and received 18 months plus restitution. The proceeds from the house sale were recovered through asset liquidation, including the boutique's inventory and fixtures. The short north space was leased by a different business within 3 months, a bookstore. As it turned out, one I have since visited and genuinely like. My mother's notebook is on my desk as I write this. I kept it after everything was resolved, not as a reminder of what happened, but as a reminder of who she was: organized, precise, unwilling to pretend that a problem was smaller than it was. She had tried to protect me the only way she could think of, leaving a letter and a recording in a box she trusted I would eventually find. I like to think she knew I would. She always said I was the one who didn't leave things unfinished. The house on Indianola is owned by a family with 2 young children now. I drove past it last spring on a Sunday morning, not to mourn it exactly, but because I needed to see it. The current owners have painted the front porch a soft green that my mother would have liked. They've put window boxes on the second-floor windows. I think sometimes about what my brother thought he was doing when he filed that forged deed. Whether he told himself a story about it, that I didn't need it as much, that Vanessa's dream was worth more than my share, that I would be fine because I had always been fine. I think the story he told himself was probably quite comfortable, at least for a while. Those stories usually are. The truth doesn't negotiate with comfortable stories. That's the thing about it. You can build entire architectures of paperwork and narrative and pre-positioned phone calls to a person's employer, and the truth will still be sitting in a safety deposit box in Bexley, waiting for someone to come with their ID and their death certificate, and a key that was always meant to be shared. I am finishing my first year of law school in May. I am focusing on estate law, which surprises some people and doesn't surprise others. I work 20 hours a week at a firm that handles exactly the kind of cases I lived through: families, property, the quiet violence that gets done between people who are supposed to protect each other. I am good at it. I am patient in the right moments and precise in the moments that require it. On the door of the apartment where I study and keep my mother's notebook, I have a small framed card that I bought at the bookstore that replaced Velvet and Grace. It says nothing profound. It's just a quote about the value of finishing what you start. I think about my parents every day. I think about the house on Indianola and the tomato pots and the magazines in the basement. I think about the morning I stood in my brother's kitchen holding a tax notice and understood, in the space of a single sentence, that my grief had been used as a construction material. I think about the fact that I didn't call anyone that day, that I drove home and sat with it and chose, for once, to be as patient as the people who had wronged me assumed I would not be. They were wrong about almost everything, but they were most wrong about that.